another clip, these two other clips that I would like to show. And I have to say that, again, that's why I said it's experimental, because I'm working from documents. I didn't go on the terrain and talk to people and go, I mean, I haven't met Harada. So it's true what's going on. There are novels, Sansal, Harraga, Par Benjeloun, Partir, To Leave. It's about the Harada. And then you have the films, novel, film, and now on the, I was telling Claire this morning that in a span of 1 year, there are dozens of new documents about the Harada. They film themselves and they put it on YouTube. And there are also theatrical plays, didactical plays by Algerian, people of the theater, trying to educate people and say, Harraga is dangerous and it doesn't make sense and this is why. And I try to explain that in theatrical plays. So for some observers, the phenomenon resembles a sort of collective hypnosis that suddenly besets thousands of men and women, now more and more women, who from one day to the next set out towards the spaces of migration. Deserted beaches, you have seen these images, landing places, the external borders of destination countries, Tangier, very important, and I will show you something, Spain, Italy, Lampedusa, Melilla, and so forth. Some interpreters even describe a phenomenon of the same order as what occurs in the infamous invasion of the body snatchers, where the inhabitant of a city, having fallen asleep near a mysterious plant of unknown origin, wake up next morning completely metamorphosed into zombies. If you have seen the film, you remember. Yes. You have to go somewhere, right? But what seems most striking to me is the scarcity of analysis that go beyond the reasons of economic hardship or political repression. Because these are the two, the fourche codine, each time it's for economic reasons or political reasons. Very few analysts venture a hypothesis that might lead to a deeper understanding of this phenomenon. Some of the many questions that cry out for answers are, I think, what provokes this type of strange behavior, or desire, if you prefer? How can we account for the sort of denial of reality that characterizes the experience of the Harka? Further, what explains the fact that at a certain point in their lives, so many young men and women, particularly from the former French or other colonies, have as their sole aspiration or main aspiration, as an obsession in most cases, of moving to the country of their former colonizers. As Hassan Kassar, the Tunisian sociologist, has noted in his study of social change and clandestine migration in Tunisia, if migration has traditionally resulted from the primitive accumulation of wealth as a consequence of colonial economy and post-war conditions, and I quote, contemporary migration, in contrast, is the result of the unlimited internationalization of the economy and of value. In the same study, Kassar refers to an article by Sassia Kassen, which shows that new economic factors linked to the creation of a transnational space of circulation have resulted in the creation of an increasingly complex and flexible, transnational labor market. Transnational labor market. A further element that Kassen identified is the way in which economic internationalization has brought local employees into contact with European technicians and workers for outsourcing firms, that thus facilitating immigration. I think it's very important, this middle space. Well, so Kassen has also explained how the westernization of systems of higher education fosters the mobility of highly skilled workers towards Western nations and reinforces movements of acculturation. I can give you just one example. I checked. There are at least 8,000 Algerian doctors in France. When in the country, you can find them in Algeria. They don't want to go. But in France, they have 8,000. Two of them are from my family, so I know them. With their family. They have kids, etc. in France. Even though this phenomenon is not new, it takes varying forms today, given the growing interdependence of South and North, and the existence of global businesses and global markets. In these conditions, the economic precarity experienced by southern countries has been continually exacerbated, especially since the first American war against Iraq, with severe effects on fundamental economic sectors such as tourism and hydrocarbons. One tends to forget, for example, the aftermath of what happened in Iraq. So this instability, I think, has created a sense of insecurity at once personal and professional, which is evident in the behavior and speech of the Harraga, particularly the younger ones. So I've shown you the Denis, for example, where he says, I'm leaving. And I would like to show you, if we can hear, if not, I'm going to skip it, a very troubling, oops, let's see, hey, this is it.
We have to open up the slide.
Oh, thank you. Here?
View, maybe?
What?
Under view?
Oh, view, okay.
Slideshow?
Slideshow.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
Next.
Where is it?
View.
View?
Go on to the next one, view.
Oh, okay.
And then down to slideshow, the fifth one. Up. Keep going.
Slideshow.
Okay.
So I have to go to the next now. Sorry about that.
Yeah, you just click the space bar until you get to the next one.
No. Okay.
Mm.
Next. This is it. And this is in Tangier, by the way. It's not in Senegal or Ghana. Okay, you have an idea. I have to.
Leave it, it's okay. It's okay, we can see.
They are not the same. There is difference. So you have to bet me. You understand? So that means that you don't know. Bet me is something carry there. You understand? Because the first time I myself around that.
He becomes an agent after having been a victim.
The guy.
I cannot go back to Ghana because
I cannot go back to Ghana.
you understand me? So I cannot go back with square one.
Just go.
And I don't like it like that. You understand? I don't want my enemy. Like now, I'm dodging my enemy. You understand? You don't see my neck catch. Like
I don't know the next card. It's really. It says it all, by the way.
when I go,
What do you want me to do if I go home?
Can you, I lost the text. Why can't you go back to Ghana? I got lost. Why can't
Because
you?
it would be a shame.
Shame. Oh.
He would have failed
I
to
see.
leave. And leaving, you can't return because you have to succeed or die. That's the problem. For some people, it's impossible to imagine that they would go back without having succeeded in doing what they had in mind. The problem is that, what do they have in mind?
Yeah,
So, clandestine immigration in its current form, frequently leading to deadly outcomes, no longer follows the patterns that prevailed in times of economic prosperity in the host countries, but results rather in the drastic changes in legislation and regulations governing border crossing in Europe, as well as Africa at the same time, particularly in the Maghreb. By closing borders to would-be immigrants and by building a virtual wall around the countries of the Mediterranean, at the very moment when the world's capital, commodities, and ideas were becoming highly globalized, so these public measures impelled the younger population of the South to find new ways of entering the North. Before the borders were completely closed, one could travel to Europe as a tourist and settle there while awaiting legalization. At present, control has become standardized by promoting drastic reductions in the number of visas granted and much stricter border controls. The treaties signed in Barcelona, along with other legal protocols, were to place thousands of young lives in danger by forcing them to take far greater, often fatal risks. The legal arsenal of the Schengen Agreement brought about profound changes in the European situation. Except for those belonging to a privileged elite, the only hope of crossing the Mediterranean was to burn one's way. Harag. This is what the word, it's a concept, very important notion. If we add to this mix of image of the quality of life in Europe or the West, promoted both by the media and by émigrés returning for vacation, potential burners find themselves with very little room to maneuver. In order to reach their goal, that is to leave at all costs, the Harragas are ready to make unimaginable sacrifices. In the Harga, clandestine migration has assumed a radically different form. I mean, different form from the immigrant, in the 60s, the Trente Glorieuses in Europe, where they wanted people to come. But when they started to close the door, then it has changed completely the situation. So no longer simply a quest for work and a better material life, it has now become an act of bravura, an act de bravoure, in which friends band together to defy the state which for them has become a synonym for failure, corruption, repression, anarchy, and I would say absence of future. And this is what is really striking, is that when you see the documentaries, they seem not to think that there is any possibility in their country. The future is there. That's why my title, La vraie vie est ailleurs, people think that it's Rimbaud, but in fact it's Jean-Luc Godard. Rewriting Rimbaud, because Rimbaud says La vraie vie est absente, which is better for the Harada. The real life is absent. So if we consider, I have a nice, interesting, document that I will show maybe at the end about this impossibility to go back. If we consider the motivations behind the Harga, how can such madness be explained? What prompts such a profound desire to leave one's country, village, and family, regardless of the accompanying dangers? Why this desire to reach Europe when it is clear one will not be welcome there? Why leave the place where one's struggles are really rooted, that is, one's home ground? You have to stay in your country. Il faut rester chez soi pour changer les choses. You're not going to change it if you go in Europe. What explains the fact that directly after the Tunisian Spring, hundreds of Tunisians rushed to board fishing boats or pleasure craft to attempt the crossing of the island to the island of Lampedusa? As I have tried to suggest, the form taken by the Harga has moved far beyond classical migration, even in its clandestine forms. It has changed. It's another culture. Potential Harragas are not necessarily unemployed or not the victims of political persecution. In other words, they do not qualify as political refugees. The typical Harraga is someone who is haunted, driven by an obsession with taking off, leaving his country of residence in order to reach an adjacent European country, whatever the risk. The goal, ideally, is to live in Europe, but for the language problem, the Harraga would be ready to head for any European country. What appears to be key is the image or representation that one has formed of the country where one dreams of living. A representation of the country involves a certain lifestyle, certain customs and values, not always well defined, that seem to the Harraga to embody real life. What I would call, borrowing from Jacques Rancière, the philosopher, a virtual wild ontology, une ontologie sauvage, governs the elaboration of images making up the Harraga's Eldorado vision of França, Spagna, Barça, Italian. I use the names, I pronounce them the way it is pronounced. I use the names given by the Harraga to France, Spain, Barcelona, Italy, to show, as Walter Benjamin has brilliantly observed, that the difference between words like Barça and Barcelona is a matter not only of denotation or referent, but also of connotation, of a way of seeing. It's what the Benjamin calls art des minus. In French, it's translated mode de la visée. So Benjamin demonstrated, I think, that we're not talking about, no thing is just the thing. It goes with images, with values, with desire, with all kinds of representations. So we should recall that for Benjamin, it is the translator's task to capture a text mode of intention, mode de la visée. The many novels, for example, stories and films that portray Harragas or give them a voice show that the difference between their perception of the world and the natives' perceptions lies not in the reference, but in the medium, not to say the media that conditions the system of values according to which they conceive of the world where they live as well as the world where they want to live. These two incompatible but quite real worlds curiously illustrate all the characteristics that Michel Foucault attributed to what he called heterotopias, described as, and this is part of the quote, concrete machine of imagination, des machines concrètes d'imagination, that create, and I quote, a space of illusion that exposes as illusory all real space, all the emplacements within which human life is confined, end of quote. In seeking the best way to translate the Harragas words and actions, as well as the mode of the visée, intention they embody, I first thought of novels by Boalem Sansal, Harada. It's a novel about it. Not the best novel. It's a disaster, really. But, I mean, it's the title. So c'est à la mode. You talk about the Harada. I mean, it's nice, huh? People are interested. So I wasn't thinking to buy them. I read the book and I thought I would talk about the book, and I said, it's worthless. Ça ne vaut rien du tout. Sansal is a good friend of mine. He wrote very interesting things, but this thing is really bad. So, and then, of course, I was thinking to Mezak Alwash movie, Harraga, which I have excerpts if I can show you. But I was thinking, in fact, to something coming from Jean Rouch, Les Maîtres Fous, the Crazy Master. Anyone has seen these movies? You have to see that. So Les Maîtres Fous, why? I turned to this film because it so clearly illustrates a profoundly troubling phenomenon. When the participants in the ritual documented by Rouch enter into a trance and become possessed by the hauka, their spirit, what is striking is that they identify not with their ancestors or with local deities, saint, or a powerful animal, but with one or another representative of the colonial power. Ils sont en transe et à qui ils s'identifient? Au gouverneur britannique, etc. While one participant may identify with the British governor, another will adopt the identity of the colonial police chief, and still another may be transformed into the wife of a colonial doctor. He's a man, but he identified with a woman. Under trance, of course. In filming these men in their spirit trance, Rouch has not attempted to reconstitute the small, closed world of the professional ethnologist. On the contrary, it is around the personae of the British governor that the hauka, spirit ritual, is organized. And the film's alternating editing makes it perfectly obvious that what we are witnessing is, I would say, neither strange in itself nor foreign to us, but is indeed the rehearsal, la répétition générale, and thus the theatricalization, la théâtralisation of a situation in which, owing to colonialism, I think, men risk madness and death every day. Madness and death are acted out in order to be conjured up and made survivable. One may well ask, how does relate to the Harraga? I think it is that the latter two are caught up in a kind of theater, but theirs is performed on a much larger scale than Rouche's portrayal of the Hauka ritual in the bush. It's larger. This theater evokes what someone like Guy Debord called the society of spectacle. The society of spectacle, as explored by Guy Debord, in an analysis that was too readily taken as limited to the Western world. What we can see now, and what is made cruelly plain by the impact of what Debord terms, and I quote, the generalized dictatorship of economic production, is that the spectacle, le spectacle, in question does not stop at the borders of Europe, but today extends all over the world, and certainly in Africa. As Debord writes, the growth of the dictatorship of modern economic production is both extensive and intensive in character. And he continues, I have another quote here if I can have it. He continues, and this is the quote, in the least industrialized regions, its presence of spectacle is already felt in certain star commodities in the form of imperialist domination by those areas that lead the world in productivity. End of quote. As soon as we understand that for Debord, these star commodities are not limited to the consumption of material goods, but represent a social relationship between people that is mediated by images, then we can better grasp, I think, what leads to this sort of what I would call a captatio imaginaris that hijacks the minds and bodies of the young men and women whom the media wars have increasingly left feeling like the flotsam and jetsam of the globalization process. They end up seeing and participating in a very narrow slice of the world, what is conveyed through pirated DVDs, YouTube clips, and television series from France, Italy, Spain, Great Britain, and above all, the United States. When I go to Algeria, there are two dishes in the house of my mother. One for her, because she doesn't understand most of the Arab channels. She's used to French, so she watched TV5, France 2, etc. But the young woman who takes care of her, because she's very old, she's 96, she needs another dish in order to have her own TV. And she watches all kinds of other things. So you have two kind of schizophrenic spaces in the same house. So I think that to gain a deeper understanding of the Harragas' apparent obliviousness to the dangers awaiting them and of their possession by the notion of Europe's elsewhere else, l'ailleurs, we may delve more closely into Debord's analysis of the society of spectacle, particularly in the sections he devotes to spectacular time. I urge you to reread this spectacular time and what he calls environmental planning. Debord shows that the so-called peripheral countries are subject not only to economic domination, but are affected, one could even say infected, by domination in all fields of activity. That is cultural, social, familial, political. And this is another quote from Debord. the society that brings the spectacle into being does not dominate underdeveloped regions solely through the exercise of economic hegemony. It also dominates them in its capacity as the society of the spectacle. Modern society has thus already invested the social surface of every continent, even where the material basis of economic exploitation is still lacking by spectacular means. So the problem for me it was because when I read Debord the first time, I didn't understand what really he called images. What is the spectacle as he conceived of it. And I think that thanks to the Harraga and also to many other experiences, we realized that in fact we are, you know, in this kind of, you know, virtual space constantly. It's very rare where you confront the thing, das Ding. It's very difficult. So this is confirmed in the case of the Harraga, this perspective, in whom a certain view of the Western world has supplanted their view of the world as well as as of their country, which they see as deficient, backward, inhuman, unstable, etc., etc. They don't like their country. They don't trust their government, etc. Even their memory is affected, along with their taste in clothing, film, and culture in general. And I remember that, for example, you could read articles all over in Europe, in Italy, in France, etc., where after the Tunisian upheaval, people would say, ben, la jeunesse, en fait, elle est mondiale maintenant. Ce que les Tunisiens, what the Tunisians are doing, in fact, our young people in France are doing the same thing. Il y a une même mouvance. So if there is the same mouvance, we understand why African would also have the experience of what's going on in Europe. So when Europeans are going to be able to be interested in what's happening in Africa, that's an interesting question. And as you know, it happens from time to time. So in the essay entitled The City as Dream, and this is my last quote, by the way. I have another 5 minutes, or should I stop? Yeah. Okay. So in the essay entitled The City as Dream, Dream World and Catastrophe, Susan Brooke Morse offers a powerful illustration of the mode of functioning of the so-called concrete machines of imagination. This is what she says. As a power structure, the connecting grid of urban space is being made obsolete by the information highways of electronic communication. Dreams, too, have entered into this electronic space. Children's fantasy resides there as well. And then electronic media provide mass reproduction of the image, not the object. This is key for me, of the image, not the object. As actual cities disintegrate, the image of the city gains in market value or appeal. Like an echo of the call for social utopia, like a mirage of the existence of collective desire, the city image enters the domestic landscape. And as you know, Harada think in terms of cities. They don't want to go to the farms again. This mirage of collective desire is indeed at the core of what motivates, I think, part or maybe more than part of the Harraga and shapes their desires for Europe. They are pursuing not objects of consumption, but rather images. And by images, it's the real thing. It goes through images. And this needs to be discussed in theoretical, philosophical terms. We would have to have the discussion that Baudrillard had with Jean-François Lyotard about the status of the materiality of the object and the symbolic aspect of the object. And as you know, for Baudrillard, big mistake to think that any object has a value by itself. it has to go through a very complex symbolic system. And this is what we witness now through TV, DVDs, etc. Everything is mediated by images. And that's why, my conclusion, I can give it to you right now, I think we have lost the war of images. The problem of African countries, of our countries, is that we don't have the power to produce images that would make young people stay. So this mirage of collective desire is indeed at the core of what motivates the Harraga. These images imported from elsewhere, by becoming more real than the real, which their spectacle has shattered, end up becoming more desirable than the reality they were supposed to represent. It is through these images that the Harraga envisions life like a virtual, this is a wonderful notion of Buchmor's, a virtual optical flaneur. They become, the Harraga is the optical flaneur, le flaneur optique, and sonore. It's through cinema. It doesn't have to be real. So that's why cinema is important. Filmmaking is crucial. And I'm glad that you are here, because I've seen your film and the quote of, for example, I guess you know the film that Leila Kilani did in Morocco, for example, about Tangier, that I've shown some excerpt. So I'm going to just finish by 2 sentences. I don't want to read the last page. So the idea is that Rancière used to say, sentiment is not political. We could react, oh my God, it's awful. Have you seen what you have seen yesterday? Some people died, etc. So this is sentimentality. And moral is not the right attitude. So Rancière proposed one thing which seems very important. He said we have to start with the desubjectification. Commencer par la désubjectivation. And which means what? It translates, how does it translate? He says, de-identification. To de-identify with what? With the state that are producing all these laws against the Harraga, excluding them, the walls. We have never seen so many walls building. C'est une paranoia, closing the walls. On the one hand, and it says de-identification vis-à-vis the African government, our own government. Il y en a marre de ces gouvernements à la noix de coco. Il faut les renvoyer. And they started in Tunisia, but as you know, this is just the beginning of something that who knows when it's going to end. Thank you.